One morning in the winter of 2010, I walked into a home of a family that lives in Mbabane in Swaziland. And there were three young children sitting at the kitchen table. They were about 6, 7 years of age. There was a tablecloth on the table that had really loud fruit printed on it, and it was finished off with a plastic veneer to protect the tablecloth. There wasn't any fruit, though, in the kitchen. In fact, I discovered soon after that there wasn't any food in the kitchen. The breakfast that these kids were eating had been donated by a local soup kitchen, and it was white bread, torn into chunks, floating in sugar water. The bread had sort of puffed up like marshmallows. I was really shocked when I saw this, but I thought this surely is an aberration. This isn't what most people eat. And then I got home and I started reading some of the research and discovered that actually around Southern Africa, thousands and thousands of children start their day just like this, every day, eating carbohydrates washed down with sugar water. So I'm a science writer, and I have spent the past 10 years telling stories around climate change, environmental crisis, invasive species, energy issues, agriculture. But I decided a few years ago to turn this sustainability lens to the issue of food, because I wanted to understand what this very vague notion of food security really means. So I'm particularly interested, though, in what it means for us, given that over half of South Africans, and the rest of the subcontinent is following the same trend, over half of us now live in cities. So that means we're very far removed from the soil that gives us our southern fried chicken and our bunny chow and our beef burger. And I discovered through this process that there's a real problem with the way we view this idea of food security, particularly as we grapple with the challenge of how we feed 9 billion people by the middle of this century, when we have limited soil, limited water, limited atmospheric space to absorb the emissions associated with farming. And the problem is this: we spend far too much time focusing on optimizing calories per hectare, how to get more food off the same amount of soil, but we're not asking what we do with those calories. So the United Nations, in the way these organizations do, has tried to throw a fence around what food security is. They've tried to define it. And basically what they say is that we are food secure when all of us have access to food all the time, but food that is healthy, nutritious, affordable, and food that is culturally appropriate. So in this process, I traveled around the country to try and understand what that very vague theoretical term means for ordinary people in their homes. I visited cities in South Africa, Lesotho, and Swaziland. And I discovered 3 very interesting things. That food security in the urban context doesn't have anything to do with whether or not there's enough food. In fact, there's plenty of food around us all the time. That family in Swaziland, they were going to eat 3 meals that day. All those meals constituted were bread and maize meal. They lived within a kilometer of a large retailer that at the end of every day has to take all the food from the deli section, the hot food, it gets thrown into bin bags, tossed in the skip out the back of the store. The following day, a municipal vehicle comes along. The municipal driver signs a form saying the food is now condemned, gets taken down to the landfill. And it was at that very landfill that I watched people like the family I just visited walking in amongst shitty nappies, carcasses of animals, and polystyrene, ripping open these bags to take that food out. Now, this is no criticism of the retailer, because they have very strict municipal bylaws around food safety. So the point is that there's plenty of food around us all the time in the city. It's deceptive. The issue is whether or not we have access to that food, and then what choices we make when we buy that food. The other thing I discovered is that 1 in 5 South African children is so poorly nourished that many of them will arrive at school with a lower IQ than they could have had. They will perform less well in school. They will emerge with a lower education. They will be less employable as adults. And the World Bank estimates that this kind of malnutrition can shave something like 10% of someone's earning potential through the course of their life. And this is all because the child didn't get the right nutrition from the moment of conception until the day they turned 2 years of age. It's this 1,000-day window of opportunity in which the child gets the chance to build a super brain, the kind of brain that they will take with them through the rest of their lives. And then the other thing I discovered is that the city makes us fat and sick. Now, for the longest time, everyone, society, the medical community, said that rising obesity rates around the world was because we're just gluttonous and lazy. And I use those terms reservedly because I know that they're value-loaded. But these are even the words coming through in medical journals like The Lancet. But the truth is that the situation is far more complex than that. The medical community says that the rising obesity rate is the response of normal people. It's the response of normal people to a very, very abnormal environment. That the urban modern space makes it too hard to make the right food and lifestyle choices and too easy to make the wrong ones. So while we still have to take responsibility for what we eat and how we use our bodies, for many people it's like swimming against a riptide. Everything is just pushing you in the wrong direction. So why is it that the city makes us fat and sick? Well, it has to do with the layout of the city. It has to do with the fact that food is a commodity. And because of the supermarket system, one tends to find really wholesome, affordable foods pooling in wealthier communities, whereas you end up with food deserts in very poorer communities. It also has to do with our cultural perceptions around food. Many of us specifically want to buy sophisticated, branded foods. We don't want to eat the peasant foods that our parents ate. It also has to do with the fact that our brains have evolved to crave what happens in our bodies when we get a kick of sugar, fat, and salt. It triggers the same pleasure center in our brain as cocaine. And the food industry specifically tailors recipes that trigger that response in our brains, and these foods are addictive. So when I visited all of these families, I asked each family to put out the raw ingredients that they were going to use for one meal that night. This is for a family of 4, a wealthy farming family in the Free State. You can see the food is very diverse. There's fantastic green leaves, lots of veggies, meat, some dairy. Significantly, this family will have access to this food tomorrow, the next day, and the day after. So they would be regarded as highly food secure. This is a family of 5 in Durban. Fewer green leafy vegetables. There's still some meat there, a little bit of greenery. What you don't see in this picture is the 4 liters of sugary drink that were on the table. This family there's no threat that they will run out of food, but it's a working class family, not quite so much money. There might be anxiety around a shortage of food. So this family would be regarded as moderately food secure. This is the meal for a woman who lives outside Cape Town. She's unemployed. She lives off a social grant. Traditionally, this is known as imifino. You can see she's done away with some of the quality, but there's still plenty of quantity because a lot of that is rice and maize meal, which will bulk up into a nice big chunky meal. There's spinach there, which is very wholesome. Cabbage, unfortunately, has not terribly much nutritional value other than fiber, and it bulks you up. So she's done away with quality, but she's got plenty of quality, so she's regarded as low on the food secure status. So the next slide, this picture is of this was the meal for the Swaziland family. That was what they were going to eat for dinner that night, a family of 5. That's porridge made from maize meal. Nothing else. So this family, because they're so poor, have had to do away with quality as well as quantity. And it's at this level where one might start to see physical wasting because of the lack of food. But now this is why malnutrition, particularly in the urban context, is known as the hidden hunger. Because around us, we are surrounded by food that is cheap, is energy dense, but often very low in nutrients. So particularly for poorer people, it's very easy to buy this food, to fill up, to drive out hunger, but they end up leaving themselves, but they're not getting terribly many nutrients. So you might find someone who's putting on weight, they look like they're well-fed, but in fact they're still malnourished at a micronutrient level. So what is it that I took away from this research and this incredible process of storytelling? Well, the main thing is that the food system is broken and that we need to find a way to fix it. The industry has benefited from our addiction to some of these foods for a long time, and yet it's often the state that has to pay for the cleanup of the associated diseases, the diabetes, the heart disease, certain cancers associated with being too heavy. In the world of environmental law, there is this notion of the polluter pays. So if you are a mining company and you pollute a wetland through your activities, in theory, you should be required to pay for the cleanup. I think it's time that we started to see certain elements of the food industry as a polluter of the nutritional landscape, and we need to find ways to get them to pay to clean up the damage. So you may have heard this figure before, but around the world, a third of all of the food that is produced for human consumption goes to waste at some point between the farm and the fork. That's 1/3. Now, this isn't just a waste of the calories and the nutrients in that food. It's a waste of all of the resources that went into farming that food. It's a waste of the soil, the water, the atmospheric space. Now, if we want to deal with this problem of how to feed the world's growing population, and we want to do it in the context of limited soil, is it appropriate to fixate so much on how to optimize calories per hectare, how to get more food off the same amount of land, when we're not asking what we do with those calories per hectare? Is it not as wasteful to take these good, wholesome calories from the farm that were environmentally very costly to produce, to put them through an industrial food system that kills the food and leaves us with empty calories in the city, and this is a diet that then makes us fat and sick and leaves us malnourished? So in the climate change community that I sort of inhabit, when we talk about sustainability, climate, carbon footprints in the context of food, we spend a lot of time talking about the two big evils, meat and dairy. And yes, relative to plant calories, animal calories are environmentally very costly to produce. They have a high carbon footprint and a high water footprint. They're also very expensive to buy. And if nutrition for poorer communities is what you're concerned about, then that is a problem. And that's before we've even got to the ethical questions around industrial animal farming. But if a diet that is high in sugar and refined carbohydrates and processed foods is making us sick, surely that is not sustainable either. We need to ask some new, fresh questions in order to understand what the optimal diet is for our own health as well as the health of the planet. Sorry, the environment. That's a very, very different thing. I hate it when environmental writers talk about saving the planet. The planet's fine. It's what's on the planet that's not. So I want to leave you with 3 points. The first is that we need to start to see sugar as the new tobacco. It's toxic, it's addictive, and it is hidden throughout our diet, even in savory foods. And I'm not just talking about sugarcane here. But speaking of sugarcane, from the perspective of farming sugarcane, it may contribute to GDP, and it may contribute to job creation, but it doesn't contribute to food security. It has no nutritional value other than giving us a short, sharp boost of energy, one that may not even be good for us. The other thing is that we need research and we need legislation. And we need these to happen within a context where they are free of the lobbying influence of the food industry. In 2011, the Lancet Medical Journal released a special report on obesity, and in that they were very clear. They said, that self-regulation by the food industry does not work. The free market system has failed us, and that we need state intervention to curb how the food industry accesses the market. And I would say this is particularly true for the highly vulnerable brains of our children that are really susceptible to addictive learning before they reach the age of 25, when the front part, the executive part of the brain, really begins to mature. And I know that the free market capitalists in the room will be hitting the Twitter sphere now, setting it alight with, oh, no, she didn't. Yes, she did. I think we really do need strong legislation. And then the final point, I think, is that we need to calculate the true cost of food. So when an item of food reflects, that when the price on an item of food reflects the free environmental services that that food has enjoyed in the growing of the food, and when the cost of treating the health implications of eating that food, when these so-called externalities are factored into the price of food, it will make refined, processed foods go up in price relative to the healthier counterparts. And hopefully that will steer people towards making slightly different, slightly healthier food choices. So the truth is that we are addicted. We're addicted to this diet of highly processed, sugary foods. And because of that, we're eating both ourselves and the environment to death. Thank you.